while I'm waiting on some fittings in order to complete the transmission swap in the Firebird, I pulled the Regal up on a set of ramps so I could start disconnecting some things to make pulling the motor easier. I suppose this is the third of my project vehicles. The Fury, the Datsun, the Firebird, and then this 82 Regal here. It's getting the LS swap, that 5.3 that I pulled apart and cleaned up, put the cam in. You can obviously see just how much space there is. This car just has the little naturally aspirated 3.8 V6. So while it was interesting to drive, it was definitely lacking power. I bought an entire handling kit for this: upper and lower control arms, sway bar, different steering box. Oh, let's see, trailing arms for the rear. Just an entire kit. I'm sure I've missed plenty of parts. I swapped in the sway bars because it had the usual mid-80s mid-size car body roll, but swapped in the sway bars and then actually put a set of 17-inch wheels with some decent rubber on them. Not that traction was an issue, but as far as the side loads going around corners and stuff, it definitely made it more fun to drive. But the eventual plan is the 5.3 going in this, with the T56 that I've taken out of the Firebird going in. Eventually I'll need to upgrade the rear end, probably do one of the bolt-in S60 swaps eventually. And then once all that's sorted out and it's running well, I plan on putting a Whipple supercharger on it. So that may be quite a ways in the future, but we'll document and follow along any of the work that I do to it until then. So I've got my Regal pulled into the shop and we're starting to disassemble it. You can see just how much space is in this engine compartment when one of these G bodies just has a V6. Granted, the radiator goes about here, but there's still almost a foot of space between the front of the fan and where the radiator would sit. It's quite a bit of space to work with. I imagine the extra 2 cylinders on any of these 305 equipped cars, or 307 V8s anyways, those extra 2 cylinders were just added to the front there, because the as close as this thing sits to the firewall, I imagine any of the V8 equipped cars, the back side of the motor would have been right in that same spot, so that all the transmission mounts and whatnot could be the same regardless of whether it was a V6 or V8 car. Another thing that draws my attention is just the mass of shit that is this motor. You know, they're factory rated. It was like 110 horsepower. Completely underwhelming, but it was a nice car to cruise in, regardless, or despite the fact that it just had a 3-speed automatic in it. It would cruise at 75, 80 all day long, and you couldn't hear this little motor just winding up. It had to have been running 2,800, 3,000 RPM, which isn't really high, but for sustained cruising, it if this thing weren't so well insulated, that would definitely get on your nerves. But we're going to continue with tearing the motor and transmission out. Any of the other items in the engine compartment that don't need to be here anymore, we'll get those out. And then I think I'm going to wheel it onto the trailer and bring it to the car wash so I can try and soap up and clean a bunch of this accumulated dirt and oil off of there. Once you crawl up underneath this thing, it's quite a bit dirtier than it looks from the top side. So once we get the motor pulled and off to the car wash, we'll come back and start, well, tearing into the suspension. I've got quite a kit, a handling kit for this car. What is it? I believe it's upper and lower control arms for the front, upper and lower trailing arms for the back, not coilovers but lowering springs, and I don't know if they're adjustable, but good shocks anyways. So we'll drop her down a little bit and give us a little more adjustability with the control arms there. One thing that I did pull out of that kit long ago was the sway bars front and rear for this. It didn't originally have a rear sway bar, and the front was just a little guy. And actually when I went to swap the sway bar out, one of the end links was completely broken off, so it wasn't doing much at all. I swapped the sway bars in, and then actually went as far as getting a set of wheels for it. They are nothing special. I actually have this same design on two of my other vehicles, the 72 Coupe de Ville and actually my Dodge pickup. It's the same design. These aren't the Kragers, because I was looking for a different color, and Krager didn't offer this. It's kind of like an OD green military look, kind of a flat dark green, which I liked. Obviously they are, what does that say? Stealth. But the Kragers are soft 8s, and basically this design is about as cheap a wheel as you can find that, in my opinion, looks pretty good, and it looks pretty good on most anything. So I'm kind of a fan. They're about 96 bucks a piece. Oh, what, they vary between 90 and 100 bucks depending on if you want a 7 or 9 inch wide rim. They only go as tall as 17 inches, so they give it a different look, and definitely better for handling than the old 14 inch 185 75s that were on it. But the cheapest tires I could find, pretty much. I think they're a little over 100 bucks a piece, but they got the look, and I'm not demanding too much performance from them, so they fit the bill. Okay, as you can see, We've removed the stock upper and lower A-arms and the associated parts. You can see that the upgraded sway bar that I already put on from the suspension kit. It's a pretty good sized piece. I think it's maybe inch and an eighth. Pretty stiff. The old single pot caliper is going to go back on for the time being till we get the engine and whatnot, the drivetrain sorted out, and the suspension kind of where we want it, and then we'll start looking into the braking aspect. The rear end that I want to get for this car, I don't know if I can get it with the housing ends that will allow me to buy a brake upgrade kit that is specific to this car while still using the aftermarket housings or axle ends. That's a ways down the road, but you can see there's still some grease and nastiness on the frame here. I took it to the car wash, but all they have really is the engine degreaser, and it's just not up to the task of really cleaning this thing. The only places where it actually did a good job of removing the grease was where I could put the wand straight down on it and just scarf off that layer of road grime. Obviously in other places, nooks and crannies and whatnot, the stuff is still there. Once I get these new pieces, suspension pieces on, I may track down a Hotsy and clean up the frame a little bit better. I believe that'll do the trick, although it will suck because I'm cleaning all the grease and whatnot off the frame with my new fancy looking suspension pieces getting all dirty. So that's what happens when you don't plan ahead well enough. Speaking of new suspension pieces, here are a few of them. Like I said before, tubular upper and lower control arms. They're that's about all you can say with those. The bushings, they aren't polyurethane or rubber. They're actually Delrin, which again is a real hard plastic. They may be a little bit noisy, but there's just almost zero deflection with these. So it'll be my first go around using those. That's the upper, and the lower is just kind of the same story. Delrin bushing. They're probably a little stouter than the old stamped pieces, and they look a hell of a lot better. Just remains to be seen how well they improve the handling. I'm sure I won't recognize the difference just because the car never got pushed handling wise while it was in its original configuration. These are my drop springs. I believe the kit that I bought is a 2-inch drop front and rear. It was a 2-inch drop with a small block Chevy, which is going to be a slightly heavier engine than our LS motor, but with the fact that these are coilovers, I'll be able to adjust the front end height wise. Again, these are a double adjustable coilover. Should do nicely once we're all assembled and back on the road. Aside from that, we'll throw all these in and take a look at it after I've done that part.